Hello everyone and welcome to Snacky Bun's channel. As the title of the video suggests, I am going to be reviewing The Many Saints of Newark in this review. Now, The Many Saints of Newark, for those of you who don't know, it's a prequel to the highly acclaimed television series The Sopranos, a show that's been off the air for nearly 15 years now, but is still talked about today because it is arguably one of the greatest TV shows of all time. It's well acted, it's well written, it's well directed, just a very, very good show. So, I'm obviously a Sopranos fan. I've watched it all the way through and watched it again when it was off the air as well. And so I had high hopes for, this movie. And after the initial release of The Many Saints earlier this month, I saw that there were some mixed reviews, but I saw in some of the reviews some die-hard Sopranos fans were saying that this movie was actually really good, and that if you were really into The Sopranos, you should check this out. So I was hopeful, and I was excited to watch it. But then I did watch it, and that movie is a steaming pile of shit. It is devoid of everything that's good in The Sopranos. And so in my review today, I'm going to go over exactly why I hated The Many Saints of Newark. Okay, so there's a lot of things about this movie that I hated, from the writing to the characters to the acting. I'm going to go over a few of them, the ones that really stood out to really bug me. So let's start out with the first scene that really annoyed me, and it was really early on in this movie. And that is the dinner scene. I guess they were having dinner with Dickie Moltisanti, who is the main character of the film, his father, Ray Liotta, and I'm talking about his father, not the recycled Uncle Ray Liotta, as well as Ray Liotta's new Italian wife. So this scene right off the bat really bugged me because, first of all, the writing's terrible. They're having this discussion at the dinner table about Mussolini, which all I could get from that is that, we're an Italian mafia movie, so we need to talk about Italy. And it's not just enough that that Ray Liotta has an Italian wife. We also need to talk about Mussolini because we need to let the audience know that this movie is very Italian. Okay, so that just felt cheesy right off the bat, but that's not the worst of it. The worst of that scene was, it was obvious from that scene that the Italian woman was, and I forgot her name, and I'm sorry, she just wasn't really that memorable. So anyway, the Italian woman was Ray Liotta's new young wife. We knew that. It was very apparent. But we had to have some fucking lady sitting at the dinner table to let us know that this woman is Dickie's stepmom. Oh, okay. Like, are we that stupid as audience that we need to have that explained to us? And there were other points in the movie where they did this as well. So that dinner scene I described was, to me, the first instance where the movie was very cheesy. But from then on, I believe it gets even worse. And what's particularly bad is the excessive use of wise guy talk. And what do I mean by wise guy talk? Wise guy talk is the type of speech where an Italian mobster is either being overly aggressive or overly obnoxious. In the case of overly aggressive, he's threatening violence. In the case of overly obnoxious, he's making wisecracks, with his friends. He's busting balls, You know what I'm talking about with wise guy talk. I'm talking about, I'm gonna break your legs, or any of that dialogue that is from a mobster, okay? And I don't have a problem with the use of wise guy talk. If it's used well, it can be very entertaining. But there was just so much of it in this movie. Like, the first instance was that scene with Dickie and Harold, who's just a fucking dullard of a character. They're pursuing some guy in the beginning of the movie, and they track him down, and Dickie says something of the likes of, you know, the last guy who spoke to me that way, I gouged out his eye. It's so stereotypical Italian mobster dialogue. Compare that to The Sopranos, where, yes, they definitely incorporated that type of speech, but it came off authentic. Number one, not all the characters use that type of speech as frequently as others. Like Paulie Walnuts, you know, he used like every word out of his mouth was like wise guy talk, but it worked for him because that was his character. But for instance, like Tony Soprano, who, yeah, he used language like how I just described, but, you know, he was much more complicated of a character. He didn't always talk about fucking breaking someone's kneecap or talking about pasta or whores. He talked about, you know, he had a family. He was a family man. He went to therapy. There's a lot to his character. And it just seemed like in Many Saints, all of the characters, them being a mobster was their entire personality. None of them really had any substance. When I was reading the bad reviews for this movie, one thing that I saw pop up over and over again was the fact that this movie constantly was trying to recreate nostalgia for the old show. It was purely for fan service, and I absolutely agree with that point. I mean, there were many moments where lines that were stated in The Sopranos were just repeated again in the movie. One instance that I think we can all remember is Junior, the younger Junior in Many Saints, falls down a flight of stairs and he yells out, "Sister's cunt." That line's repeated. He said it in the show when he fell in the bathtub. Only difference is, back then it was funny. Now it's old. And they did this with every character. It almost seems that it was to the point where the characters that reappeared in the Many Saints were caricatures of what they were in The Sopranos. One awful, awful scene is when Silvio Dante, who, by the way, he looks like he's 40 or in his 40s and back in the 1960s, which makes absolutely no sense. There's a scene where his wig like flies off. Again, I guess that they were trying to be funny, but it just destroys the characters. It destroys the magic of the original characters. The fans, and I think the real fans, they didn't want to see lines repeated in the movie, which we enjoyed in the show. No, we wanted to see a look at the background, some substantive background behind these characters who we watched and were entertained by, and a lot of us grew up with. And they didn't do that here. A few months back, when I watched the trailer for this film, I saw that there was a lot of emphasis on the Newark riots. And it wasn't just the trailer that made me think that the Newark riots were going to be a central plot point in this film. I also saw an interview with David Chase, and he was talking about how the Newark riots were really going to tie into the story. And it was going to be, you know, an essential part of this movie. But when you watch the movie, when you watch Many Saints, and when you think about it, I mean, the story would have been exactly the same. Everything would have turned out exactly the same if the riots were not even mentioned. So, you know, I really don't understand what the purpose of the riots were. I mean, to be quite honest and fair, I have no idea what The Many Saints is even about. I still have no idea what the point of the movie was. Just because it was just going in so many directions, and overall it was just a huge fucking mess. But that said, if you're going to advertise the movie about being, about the Newark riots, and it's going to be a focus point in the plot, then you should actually execute on that. Now my theory as to why it was Newark riots were added to the plot is this. So I heard that David Chase, before making The Sopranos, wrote a story about the Newark riots, and it involved guys who were in the National Guard and their experience in the Newark riots. And David Chase wanted to pursue this into a movie, and instead he produced The Sopranos. So my theory is that David Chase wanted to do this project that he was never able to do, and found a way to incorporate that story by doing a prequel for The Sopranos. So that's my theory as to why the Newark riots were even a topic, because I have no other explanation. So I could bitch about this movie forever, but in considering time, I'm going to end with a couple final thoughts. I want to point out that I really hated the ending of this movie. I hated the fact that Junior was the one who killed Dickie, and I hate the reason why Junior killed Dickie. It appeared that Junior killed Dickie merely because Dickie insulted Junior when Junior fell down the stairs. It seems like such a silly reason to kill somebody, and it seems completely contrary to Junior's character, or at least how they portrayed him in the show. If you remember, Junior was always very manipulative. He was very calculated, and everything that he did was premeditated. So for him to make such a rash decision just seems completely out of character, and I just didn't really believe it. Another thing about the movie that really rubbed me the wrong way was just the portrayal of young Tony Soprano. Now, I don't want to shit on James Gandolfini's son. I actually think that he did an okay job acting in this movie. But, he didn't have much to work with. He had really bad dialogue. He had limited time on screen. And, just the overall story and plot didn't really make sense throughout the whole movie. So, it was kind of inevitable that it would turn out bad. But that stated, I just didn't like the young Tony Soprano's portrayal in this movie. I'd say if there's anything in this movie that I liked, I guess you could say that I liked the fact that Dickie was cucked by Harold. I just like it because I think it's kind of funny. But other than that, nothing else that I really cared for about this movie. Well, that concludes it, guys. Thanks for watching. Later on, I might do a review of the Sopranos series, do a review of the actual show. But hope you enjoyed this review. For those of you who did like this movie, I gotta say, stop holding on to the past. The Sopranos was a good show, and this movie was absolute shit. Thanks for watching, guys.